What really happened to Ozzy Osbourne at 76? The Prince of Darkness has lived a life few could imagine, rising from the gritty streets of Birmingham to becoming a rock legend. But now, as he enters his twilight years, shocking updates about his health and personal battles have surfaced, leaving fans heartbroken and inspired all at once. From stage triumphs to painful surgeries, Ozzy's story is one of resilience, love, and unimaginable strength. So ask yourself, how does a man who defied death for decades face the most human battle of all? Stay tuned, and try not to cry when you see this. Before the music, there was silence. Before the roaring crowds and the blazing lights, before the name Prince of Darkness was etched into music history with blood and distortion, there was only silence. A silence so heavy it threatened to smother the soul of a boy who didn't grow up dreaming of stardom. He grew up learning how to survive. In the bleak, soot-stained streets of Aston, Birmingham, John Michael Osborne, later known to the world as Ozzy Osbourne, was born into a world that felt like it had already decided his fate. The year was 1948, and England was still reeling from the devastation of World War II. Birmingham, once a thriving industrial powerhouse, was now a city caught in the grip of economic decline, where factory smokestacks outnumbered aspirations. A cramped childhood. The Osborne family lived in a small, cramped home that barely fit its 8 inhabitants. 6 children, a mother, and a father. The house, situated in one of the poorest parts of Birmingham, had no luxuries, and sometimes not even the basics. There was no central heating, no privacy, and very little peace. His father, Jack Osborne, worked long, punishing hours at a factory, and he brought home more than a paycheck. He brought home the belief that emotion was weakness, that survival came from shutting up and pushing forward. His mother, Lillian, spent her days on an assembly line and her nights cooking, cleaning, and trying to keep the chaos of 6 children at bay. There was no room for softness in the Osborne household. John, Ozzy, wasn't the loudest of the Osborne kids. He wasn't the smartest or the funniest. He was the one who was overlooked, the one who slipped between the cracks. At school, he struggled terribly. The letters in books danced around cruelly, mocking him every time he tried to read. Numbers slipped through his mind like water through a sieve. In the 1950s, dyslexia wasn't recognized or understood. To teachers and classmates, he was simply slow, a dunce. The label stuck like tar. He became the perfect target. Torment without end. The bullying wasn't just verbal. It was brutal and relentless. Fists, kicks, and bloody noses were his daily routine. He was the school punching bag, a boy whose cries went unheard and whose pain was invisible to the adults who should have protected him. One day, after yet another beating at school left him in tears, he came home and dared to cry in front of his father. The response? A belt across his back. Pain didn't get you sympathy, Ozzy would later say. It got you punishment. There was no refuge at home or at school. There was only a growing silence, a silence that screamed in his ears every night as he lay awake, wondering what he had done to deserve this life. By the time he was 14, that silence had become unbearable. In a small, dimly lit bedroom in their Aston home, he tied a noose with his mother's washing line. He climbed onto a chair and waited for the world to let go of him. But fate, or perhaps just bad timing, intervened. His father burst through the door. What followed wasn't compassion or concern. It was a beating. Jack Osborne, unable to process or understand his son's pain, lashed out the only way he knew how. The breaking point. Something inside Ozzy shattered that day. Or perhaps it calcified. He stopped trying. School became meaningless. His speech became limited to what was necessary. He didn't care about friends or hobbies or teachers or even the future. The laughter of other children became a sound he couldn't understand, like a language he was never taught. When he looked in the mirror, he didn't see a boy. He saw a ghost with eyes that still moved. At 15, Ozzy dropped out of school. He had no qualifications, no direction, no plan. He bounced from one menial job to another. A slaughterhouse worker, a construction helper, a car horn tuner at a local factory. Each job ended the same way. He was either too clumsy, too distracted, or too disinterested. He got fired repeatedly. It became a cycle of rejection and despair. Hunger gnawed at him. Real hunger. The kind that makes your stomach cramp and your hands tremble. His clothes barely held together. His shoes were worn thin. And inside, he was unraveling. Every closed door seemed to confirm what the world had been telling him since birth. He was nothing. The desperation that led to crime. By 1965, the spiral had reached a new depth. Desperation didn't just creep in, it crashed through the door. With no money, no job, and no hope, Ozzy turned to crime. Along with a few others, he attempted to rob a clothing store. The job was poorly planned and quickly botched. He was arrested and sentenced to 6 weeks in Winston Green Prison. In many ways, it was the logical next chapter in a life that had known more shadows than light. Rock bottom behind bars prison didn't reform him. It simply confirmed what he already believed about himself, that he was worthless. He was now not just a failure, but a criminal too. He was surrounded by hardened men, some violent, some broken in ways even he couldn't comprehend. On his first night, he was attacked by another inmate. Ozzy defended himself the only way he knew how, with a metal chamber pot. It wasn't a fight. It was survival. But something unexpected happened in that hellhole. One day, a cheap radio in the corner of the room crackled to life, and through the static came a song that would change everything. The Beatles' She Loves You. For Ozzy, it was as if God had spoken. It was like hearing God speak to me through music, he would later say. That moment didn't erase the bruises on his body or the fear in his bones, but it planted a seed. He didn't know how, and he certainly didn't know when, but he knew he had to be part of that world. Music wasn't just a sound, it was an escape hatch. It was a vision of a life where he could be someone else, someone loud, someone unforgettable. The first notes of a new life. When Ozzy was released from prison in late 1965, he was more lost than ever. But now he had something new. Desire. He wanted to live, not just survive. He began dabbling in music, trying to find his voice in a world that had never listened to him before. He didn't know how to play an instrument. He couldn't read music. But he had a voice, raw and haunted, and he had pain, a bottomless well of it. By 1968, that voice found its echo. Responding to a newspaper ad seeking a vocalist, Ozzy walked into a rundown rehearsal room and met 3 other misfits. Tony Iommi, a guitarist with mutilated fingers and thunder in his soul. Geezer Butler, a bassist whose lyrics often drew from the occult and the existential. And Bill Ward, a drummer whose playing could shake the walls. They were all broken in some way, all searching for something real in a world that felt increasingly hollow. Earth to Sabbath. A transformation. Initially, they called themselves Earth, but the name didn't stick. Inspired by a Boris Karloff horror film playing in a local theater, they rebranded as Black Sabbath. The name was more than just clever branding. It was a statement. As Ozzy once put it, if people pay to be scared, why not give them music that terrifies and moves them? On February 13th, 1970, Friday the 13th no less, they released their debut album, Black Sabbath. Critics hated it. They called it satanic, grotesque, a betrayal of music. But teenagers locked in their bedrooms with too many thoughts and not enough hope saw something else. They saw salvation. That same year, they released Paranoid, an album that was written in just days but became a cultural earthquake. Songs like War Pigs, Iron Man, And the title track weren't just hits. They were war cries for the misfits. Ozzy's voice wasn't trained, but it didn't need to be. It was filled with anguish, with desperation, with the raw humanity of someone who had nothing left to lose. The pain behind the persona. By the mid-1970s, Black Sabbath had become gods of a genre they didn't even set out to create: heavy metal. Ozzy was no longer the ghost boy from Birmingham. He was a global icon. But inside, he was crumbling. The louder the applause, the more deafening his inner emptiness became. Drugs and alcohol became his coping mechanisms. His childhood trauma, unresolved and untreated, continued to poison him from within. His bandmates began to notice the change. Missed rehearsals, slurred speech, volatile behavior. The brotherhood that had once bound them began to erode. By 1979, tensions had reached a breaking point. But instead of confronting him directly, they sent someone else to deliver the final blow. Ozzy was out. Fired from the very band that had saved his life. "They didn't even have the balls to tell me themselves," Ozzy recalled, his voice still laced with hurt years later. "That was my band." The echo in the void. Devastated and directionless, Ozzy disappeared into a Los Angeles hotel room. He drew the curtains, turned off the world, and drowned himself in substances. "I just sat in that room," he would later say. "I numbed myself until I couldn't feel anything. I thought I would fade away in that silence." To the outside world, he was still Ozzy Osbourne, rock god. But inside, he was again that boy from Aston, the one who had once stood on a chair with a noose around his neck, begging the world to notice. But legends don't die in silence. They scream. And Ozzy's scream was far from over. The storm. Before the silence. After the chaos came. Silence. Not peace, not relief, just a hollow stillness, the kind that echoes in the mind of a man teetering on the edge of self-destruction. In that emptiness stood Ozzy Osbourne, once the electrifying voice of Black Sabbath, the so-called Prince of Darkness, now reduced to a broken shell of the legend he had been. By 1989, decades of substance abuse, public scandal, and inner torment had driven him to a moment so dark that it shocked even the most jaded observers of rock excess. In a drug-fueled blackout, he had attacked the very person who had stood by him through everything: his wife, Sharon Osbourne. The event was horrifying and almost fatal. Sharon pressed charges, leading to Ozzy's arrest. But instead of incarceration, the courts intervened with a more fitting verdict: psychiatric evaluation and rehabilitation. This wasn't just a legal outcome. It was a final plea from the world around him to try and salvage what was left. As Ozzy himself would later admit, this was his last chance. He had crossed a line that even he, in his darkest moments, had never imagined possible. A shadow in the corner. Inside the cold, antiseptic halls of a rehab facility, the man who once screamed on world stages now sat quietly, almost invisibly. Ozzy didn't speak for weeks. The man who had once commanded stadiums with animalistic charisma was now a ghost haunting the corridors of recovery. The silence wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the suffocating weight of guilt, remorse, and confusion. Every hour was a battle with himself, his past, and the voices that had led him to that abyss. Many thought he wouldn't recover. And truthfully, there were moments he didn't think so either. Ozzy later described those early days in treatment as some of the loneliest of his life. Detox wasn't just about removing substances from his system. It was about confronting the trauma, both inflicted and received, that he had numbed for years. But even in the darkest corners, a flicker of light can survive. That light, for Ozzy, came in the form of Sharon. Despite everything, despite nearly being taken from this world by the man she loved, Sharon did not walk away. She visited him regularly, her presence a strange juxtaposition of pain and hope. There was still a spark. she would later say. Very deep. But I knew it was there. Confronting the demons within Ozzy's rehabilitation marked a painful transformation. For the first time, he began facing his demons, not on stage, but in the raw honesty of therapy and self-reflection. He confronted memories long buried, regrets unspoken, and parts of himself he barely recognized. The process was agonizing. Each step forward often came with 2 steps back. Yet slowly, the fog began to lift. By 1990, he emerged from treatment, fragile, humbled, and uncertain, but alive. More importantly, he was willing to try. I wasn't cured, he said later, but I was aware I could fight. Rebirth through music. Returning to the studio wasn't immediate, nor was it easy. Gone was the reckless energy of his early solo days. Instead, Ozzy approached music with a raw, aching clarity. He reunited with virtuoso guitarist Zakk Wylde, a musical partner who understood both Ozzy's vision and his pain. Together, they began working on what would become one of the defining albums of Ozzy's career, No More Tears, 1991. This was no mere album. It was a bloodletting. Tracks like Mama, I'm Coming Home, Road to Nowhere, and the title track were steeped in introspection. These weren't just songs. They were confessions, regrets put to melody, and desperate apologies carved into vinyl. It was the sound of me trying to be human again, Ozzy would later reflect. Critics hailed the album as a return to form, and fans embraced him with open arms. He was no longer just a rock star. He was a survivor, and in many ways, a symbol of redemption. But the journey was far from over. A phoenix with scars. Throughout the early 1990s, Ozzy continued to rebuild. He poured himself into work, channeling his energy into global tours and new projects. In 1992, he announced what was intended to be his farewell tour, a dramatic gesture from a man who had long defied the limits of mortality. But true to his unpredictable nature, he returned to the stage just a few years later. Behind the scenes, sobriety was a daily battle. Every concert, every sober day was a victory won not with ease but with determination. Sharon remained a constant, not just as a wife or manager, but as a partner in his ongoing battle. She saved my life, not once, but every single day, Ozzy once said. Their marriage, fraught with turmoil, infidelity, and public spats, somehow endured. It became a monument to the idea that love, when paired with resilience, could withstand even the harshest storms. The world meets the Osbournes. In the early 2000s, Ozzy Osbourne's life took an unexpected turn, from the darkness of his past to the harsh light of reality television. In 2002, the Osbournes premiered on MTV, offering the world a voyeuristic peek into the domestic chaos of a rock legend's home. The show was an immediate hit, turning the Osbournes into unlikely pop culture icons. Audiences were captivated by the surreal blend of profanity, affection, and dysfunction. Ozzy, now in his 50s, often appeared confused, shuffling around in slippers, struggling with remote controls, and muttering to himself in bemused frustration. But there was something deeply endearing about him, a contrast to the fearsome persona of his younger days. This was no longer the Prince of Darkness, but a bewildered, kind-hearted father trying to find peace in a world far removed from the madness of the 1970s and 80s. Yet, behind the laughter and ratings, a more sobering reality remained. Years of substance abuse had left their mark. His body was deteriorating. His reflexes were slowed. His speech was slurred. And the past still haunted him. The crash that almost ended it all. On December 8, 2003, tragedy struck again. What began as a simple ride around his countryside estate in Buckinghamshire, England, turned into a near-fatal accident. Ozzy, riding a quad bike, lost control. The machine flipped and crashed onto him with devastating force. His collarbone was shattered. 8 ribs broken. A vertebra in his neck was crushed. His lungs collapsed. He stopped breathing. Paramedics were called immediately. Sharon, thousands of miles away, received the call no loved one ever wants to hear. Ozzy was airlifted to Wexham Park Hospital and placed in intensive care. For 8 days, he lay in a medically induced coma, his life hanging by a thread. "I thought I was going to lose him," Sharon later said. "I was preparing myself to say goodbye." The outpouring of concern from fans, peers, and celebrities was overwhelming. The man who had seemingly survived everything, from drug overdoses to bats on stage, was now closer to death than ever before. Clawing his way back when Ozzy finally awoke, his first words were barely audible. "Not again," he whispered. The humor in that statement masked a brutal truth. He would have to start over. Again. Recovery this time wasn't just emotional or spiritual, it was deeply physical. He had to relearn how to walk, breathe without assistance, and rebuild muscles damaged by the trauma. The process was agonizing. Physical therapy sessions were excruciating. His movements were slow and painful. And yet, he pushed forward with characteristic grit. In March 2004, barely 3 months after the accident, Ozzy made a public appearance at the Brit Awards. Walking gingerly onto the stage, he was greeted with a thunderous ovation. It wasn't just applause. It was a collective sigh of relief, a recognition of his indomitable spirit. But the scars of the accident ran deep. Chronic pain became his new normal. "Some mornings I wake up and I can barely move," he confessed in an interview. "But I'm still breathing, and as long as I am, I'll keep going." A legend who refused to quit. Ozzy Osbourne's life has never been a smooth ride. His journey is a chaotic, blood-splattered symphony of brilliance and destruction, stitched together with resilience and the unlikely power of love. He has faced ridicule, arrest, scandal, near-death experiences, and unimaginable personal torment. And each time, he has come back, crawling, limping, or roaring. His story is not just one of rock and roll excess. It is one of survival, of a man who, by all accounts, should have died many times over. A man who wrestled with addiction, mental illness, and pain, and yet stood on stage again and again, screaming into the void not just for the crowd, but for himself. Borrowed time, earned legacy. Looking back on his life, Ozzy once mused, "I never thought I'd live this long. Every day is borrowed time, and I'm just trying to make it count." And that is perhaps the most haunting and beautiful truth of all. For those who know where he came from, the cell in Winston Green Prison, the blacked-out hotel rooms, the wrecked stages and broken bones, Ozzy Osbourne is not just a rock star. He is a symbol of what it means to endure, to survive, and to reclaim one's humanity, even after you've nearly destroyed it. He may still carry the scars, both visible and invisible, but he wears them with pride. Because in a world where so many fall and never get up, Ozzy Osbourne stands, bruised, bent, but never broken. The fall that reopened old wounds. Just when Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness himself, believed he had endured every tempest that life could throw at him, 2019 arrived with a cruel and unrelenting blow that would shake him to his very core. In a quiet moment at home, no thunderous crowd, no blinding stage lights, no amplified guitars, his body betrayed him in the most unexpected way. A simple fall, a stumble that would seem insignificant to most, unraveled into a catastrophic event that unearthed a long-buried agony. It wasn't just a broken bone or a twisted joint. It was much worse. The metal rods surgically implanted into his spine in 2003 after a near-fatal ATV accident were dislodged. These rods had been his lifeline, supporting a body already ravaged by years of stage diving, substance abuse, and the sheer physicality of rock and roll. This fall, so sudden, so unassuming, felt like fate reaching through time with cold, merciless hands, prying open old scars with terrifying precision. The pain that followed was beyond description. Ozzy later confessed in a rare moment of vulnerability. It was agony beyond anything I've ever felt. A haunting admission from a man whose life has been marred by self-inflicted chaos, addiction, and close brushes with death. Every nerve ending seemed to ignite in protest. The man who once prowled stages with animalistic intensity could barely move. The pain wasn't just physical. It was a spiritual collapse, a shattering of the myth he had become. The diagnosis, a cruel rewrite of identity. But the fall was only the beginning of his latest descent. As he recovered, doctors dealt him another blow, perhaps the cruelest of all. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a neurodegenerative disorder that slowly strips away control of the body's movements. For most, it's a devastating prognosis. For a performer like Ozzy, whose identity was so deeply intertwined with his physicality, his wild gestures, and that electrifying presence on stage, it was a sentence of erasure. Parkinson's did not just affect his hands or his legs, it threatened his very essence. His legs grew unreliable, his speech occasionally slurred, and his hands trembled with a disobedience he couldn't will away. In a deeply emotional interview on Good Morning America, he admitted, "I'm no good with secrets. I can't walk properly these days. I'm just wobbling." These weren't just admissions of physical decline. They were the sounds of a titan confronting mortality, staring down the fading fire of youth and vitality, living through misery. Sharon and the battle at home. Ozzy would later describe those years as sheer misery, a phrase that barely scratches the surface of the relentless torment he endured. It wasn't only about the physical pain or the endless surgeries that followed the fall. It was about watching himself disappear piece by piece, losing parts of what made him whole, parts he had fought to preserve through addiction, accidents, and age. Parkinson's was a thief, stealing him in increments. Yet, through every bleak morning and tear-soaked night, there was one constant: Sharon Osbourne. More than just a wife, she remained his rock, his nurse, his defender, and his greatest advocate. From hospital corridors to sleepless nights at home, she stood by him. Not out of duty, but out of a fierce and unwavering love that had already weathered decades of public drama and private hell. Still, even her strength couldn't stop the march of the disease, nor could it halt the sadness in Ozzy's eyes as he watched his body fail him. The guilt of silence. Coming clean to the world. Ozzy eventually revealed that one of the most emotionally difficult parts of his journey was keeping his Parkinson's diagnosis a secret. He felt he owed his fans honesty. After all, they had stood by him through the wild years, through scandals, breakdowns, and comebacks. "I felt like I was lying to them," he said, "like I was letting them down." But when he finally came forward, his fears proved unfounded. His fans didn't abandon him. They rallied. Across social media, music forums, and in the letters and tributes that poured in, the world showed that their love for Ozzy went beyond his music. They admired his courage, his vulnerability, his willingness to share his suffering. In a genre often dominated by invincible bravado, Ozzy's humanity became his most powerful legacy. Ordinary man, a defiant roar in the darkness. Even as his body weakened, Ozzy's spirit refused to yield. In 2020, he released Ordinary Man, a haunting and poignant album that served not only as a creative triumph, but a resounding declaration: "I am still here." Collaborating with Elton John, Slash, and Post Malone, Ozzy poured his soul into every lyric, every note, a bittersweet meditation on fame, fragility, and mortality. It wasn't just an album. It was a sonic memoir, a farewell letter written not in ink, but in distorted guitar riffs and gravel-throated vocals. Songs like Under the Graveyard and Ordinary Man captured the essence of a man who had danced with death more times than he could count. and still chose to sing. Legends don't fade. The fight to endure. Ozzy didn't stop. Despite requiring canes and support to walk, despite surgeries and recurring pain, he kept moving forward. He became a symbol of resilience, not just for rock fans, but for anyone facing chronic illness, aging, or personal loss. "I'm not ready to hang up my mic yet," he declared, and the world believed him. The idea of retirement, of simply fading into obscurity, didn't sit well with the man who once bit the head off a bat on stage and terrified a generation of parents. Ozzy wasn't just a performer. He was a movement, a mythos, a force of cultural upheaval. He couldn't simply fade. And so he endured, with trembling legs and a fire that refused to go out. 2025. Back to the beginning. At age 76, the shadows around Ozzy Osbourne grew heavier. Not cast by stage lights this time, but by the creeping progression of illness. His voice, once a fierce war cry, now trembled with age and fatigue. Each step required planning, each movement measured and cautious. He was no longer the untamable showman, but what he had lost in power, he had gained in wisdom, reflection, and peace. Then came July 5th, 2025, a date etched into the annals of music history. Ozzy Osbourne, alongside the original members of Black Sabbath, returned to where it all began, Birmingham, England. The concert, aptly named Back to the Beginning, was more than a performance. It was a spiritual homecoming, a farewell. Over 40,000 fans packed the arena. More than 5.8 million streamed the event worldwide. As Ozzy took the stage, escorted by Sharon and a cane, the audience fell into a hush, reverent, tearful. Every step he took, every lyric he sang, was laced with finality and courage. His voice cracked under the weight of emotion, his body shook, but his spirit, unbroken. At one point he whispered, "This is it," and the world understood. This was not just a concert. It was the last page of a long and thunderous novel. With each chord, each verse, Ozzy offered a piece of his soul, and the crowd responded with an outpouring of love that could be felt in every corner of the globe. A final act of generosity. The proceeds from Back to the Beginning amounted to a staggering $190 million. But Ozzy didn't pocket a penny. Every cent was donated to causes close to his heart. Cure Parkinsons, Birmingham Children's Hospital, and Acorn Children's Hospice. In his final act as a stage performer, Ozzy transformed his goodbye into a gift, a gesture that captured the essence of who he had become. Not just a rock god, but a generous, reflective soul who had emerged from the chaos with newfound purpose. The echo never dies. Though Ozzy has since stepped away from live performances, he remains a vibrant presence. He and Sharon continue to host their podcast, The Osbournes, offering unfiltered, often hilarious insights into their lives. Through this platform, fans are reminded of Ozzy's enduring wit and irreverence. He talks about death with an odd calm, jokingly calling it just the next tour, with no sound check yet. At home in Buckinghamshire, now adapted with railings and medical facilities, Ozzy finds comfort in routine. He listens to old records in the garden, occasionally hums along, and tells wild, epic tales to his grandchildren. Stories that sound too fantastical to be true, but are, in fact, chapters of his own life. These stories, once symbols of excess, now serve as lessons on survival, resilience, and the cost of living loud. A legacy set in stone. Ozzy Osbourne may no longer command stadiums or leap into the crowd, but his echo remains. It lives in the records, the interviews, the tears and laughter of his fans. It lives in every artist inspired by his audacity, every misfit who found a home in his music. His story, one of destruction, recovery, pain, and triumph, is not just about rock and roll. It is about the human capacity to endure, to adapt, to fight, even when the body breaks down. Ozzy Osbourne, battered but never broken, remains a beacon, not of perfection, but of persistence. Because even when the lights go down and the amps fall silent, the echo of a true legend never dies. A quiet chapter, a lasting legacy, the final act of Ozzy Osbourne. In the twilight of a life that has seen both infernos and resurrections, John Michael Ozzy Osbourne has entered a quieter chapter, one not marked by pyrotechnics or chaotic tour buses, but by the profound rhythm of reflection, family, and purpose. No longer merely a rock star or the Prince of Darkness, Ozzy stands today as a cultural institution, a human testament to survival, and a father whose enduring bond with his children anchors this late chapter of his life. The children of a legend, each path lit by the same flame. Central to Ozzy's life now are his children, each of whom reflects a different facet of the legacy he's built. They were born into a life orbiting around guitars, tabloids, and the intoxicating highs and harrowing lows of fame. But their paths have diverged, shaped not only by his shadow, but by their own desires to either step into it, mold it, or, at times, escape from it. Amy Osbourne, the private artist. Amy Osbourne, Ozzy's eldest daughter with wife Sharon, was born in 1983 and represents the countercurrent of her family's very public life. While her siblings stepped into the spotlight with the MTV reality series The Osbournes, Amy made the conscious decision to remain off-camera. Her choice wasn't rooted in rebellion, but rather in a need for autonomy and artistic purity. She forged her own creative path in music under the moniker ARO, creating a body of work that blends ethereal vocals with moody, synth-driven soundscapes. Her music feels like an echo of her inner world, haunted, lyrical, introspective, far removed from the public's image of her rock and roll roots. Her resolve to walk a different road is itself a form of courage, quietly rewriting what it means to be a child of Ozzy Osbourne. Kelly Osbourne, fashion, fame, and fierce identity. Born in 1984, Kelly Osbourne quickly became a fixture of early 2000s pop culture. With her punk aesthetic, unfiltered opinions, and vulnerability on screen, Kelly distinguished herself as more than just Ozzy's daughter. She was an iconoclast. Her journey through fame has been raw and transparent. She's been a fashion designer, a television host, a singer, and a survivor of her own battles with addiction and public scrutiny. Her musical career, while not as extensive as her father's, included hits like her cover of Madonna's Papa Don't Preach, and collaborations with artists that revealed her versatile voice and edgy spirit. Yet, her greatest artistry lies in how she has owned her identity. Never afraid to credit her father's influence, but fiercely determined to define herself outside of it. Her public struggles with addiction, weight, and self-image were not shielded behind PR statements. They were lived in front of millions. And through each fall, Kelly has risen with resilience that echoes her father's journey. Messy, brave, and ultimately redemptive. Jack Osbourne. From darkness to discovery. Jack Osbourne, born in 1985, shares a bond with Ozzy that has grown deeper with age and adversity. Once the shaggy-haired teen of the Osbournes, Jack has evolved into a thoughtful documentarian, reality TV producer, and supernatural enthusiast. His projects, such as Portals to Hell, explore the mysterious and the unexplained, perhaps mirroring the internal odysseys his family has endured. Jack's life, too, has been marbled with personal battles. Diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at just 26, he has since become a vocal advocate for MS research and healthy living. His dedication to wellness and fatherhood has redefined his public image and cemented his role not just as Ozzy's son, but as his caregiver, confidant, and one of the main stewards of his legacy. Jack frequently accompanies Ozzy to medical appointments, assists with logistical and public obligations, and remains one of the most visibly involved family members in Ozzy's day-to-day life. His calm presence has become the grounding force in Ozzy's later years. Jessica and Louis Osbourne. The quiet branches less is known about Jessica and Louis Osbourne, Ozzy's children from his first marriage to Thelma Riley. Jessica, born in 1972, and Louis, born in 1975, have chosen lives far from the headlines, embracing privacy over paparazzi. Louis has dabbled in the music industry as a DJ and producer, quietly continuing a thread of musical DNA, while Jessica has remained entirely out of the limelight. Though their presence is less visible, reports and occasional interviews confirm that they remain part of Ozzy's extended family web, proof that not all legacies need spotlights to be real. The ties that bind. Family as redemption. Ozzy's relationship with his children, particularly Kelly and Jack, has transformed from the chaotic, often painful dynamics of the early 2000s into something deeply intimate. In interviews, public appearances, and candid moments captured online, the affection is palpable. Jack's protective demeanor, Kelly's fierce loyalty, and Amy's quiet respect form a tapestry of connection that proves healing is possible, even after years of dysfunction and fame-fueled fragmentation. Ozzy once described fatherhood as his greatest challenge and his greatest reward. "I was a mess for most of their childhood," he admitted, "but they stuck with me. Now I'm the one who gets to be there for them." Beyond the stage, the philosopher behind the madness. It's tempting to view Ozzy Osbourne only through the lens of spectacle. The bat incident, the wild stage antics, the slurred interviews. But beneath the persona lies a man of astonishing depth. Born in 1948 in Birmingham, England, Ozzy came from poverty and hardship, his early life defined by bullying, learning difficulties, and blue-collar labor. He found his escape in music, first with Black Sabbath, where he helped invent heavy metal as a genre, and later with a solo career that defied every expectation. Albums like Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman were more than commercial successes. They were cultural detonations. But the ascent came with its own curse. Addiction, mental health struggles, and brushes with death that would fell a lesser man. Today, that hard-won wisdom is what defines him. Ozzy isn't interested in glory. He's interested in meaning. A legacy written in ink and intent, the will of a survivor. In early 2024, Ozzy finalized his will, a document more profound than legal paperwork. It was, as he put it, a reckoning. Having flirted with death too many times to count, he prepared not from fear, but from focus. The estate, estimated at over $220 million as of 2025, is vast, but the division of wealth is purposeful. Sharon Osbourne, his wife of over 4 decades, remains his primary confidant and beneficiary, alongside their children, Amy, Kelly, Jack, Jessica, and Louis. Specific trusts have been set up for his grandchildren, designed to ensure their education and long-term security. But what sets this will apart from other celebrity legacies is where Ozzy directed much of his remaining fortune. Rehabilitation and recovery programs, mental health services for musicians, scholarships for working-class youth in the arts, and animal rescue shelters. "I owe my second, third, and maybe fourth life to the people who didn't give up on me," Ozzy once said. "Now it's my turn not to give up on them." In a private note, to be read at his memorial service, Ozzy penned a final act of devotion. He directed all future royalties from his solo music catalog to continue funding these causes indefinitely. "Music saved me. It might save someone else," he wrote.